take it away.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our Lunch in the Garden webinar. My name is David Chinnery. I work here at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Rensselaer County in East Greenbush, New York. And this is another one of our Lunch in the Garden programs. Our fifth one for this spring. We have one more to go next week. Next Wednesday, April 24th, will be our final program. It's called Aging with the Garden. Green Thumbs Never Die. So it's my favorite title of all the classes we've had, although I really enjoyed all of our programs quite a bit. But if you'd like to come to that one, you can sign up on our web page. If you go to Cornell Cooperative Extension in Rensselaer County and go under the events section, you can sign up for that as well. So today we're going to have another great program. Our Master Gardener Lorraine Ferguson is going to be talking about shore gardening, gardening near a lake, near a water body, which is kind of a unique topic. I don't think we've ever covered this topic before, so I'm excited to hear about it. It really is a very important topic because we talk a lot about water quality these days, trying to keep water bodies free or less polluted from things like fertilizers, pesticides, and by treating your lawn, well, I'll say by treating your shoreline correctly, you can really reduce some of those problems. And also sometimes shorelines are difficult to manage, I think. So Lorraine is going to tell us all about that. And if you're here on our webinar today and have a question, please type it in the chat box and we'll go over those at the end. So Lorraine, I know you live on a beautiful lake, and you'll probably tell us a little bit about that. I'm going to turn the program over to you, and thank you for being our speaker today.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, we can see your program.
All right,
That looks
excellent.
good.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking some time and for your interest in this topic on shoreline planting. As David mentioned, I do live on a small lake called Big Bowman Pond here in Rensselaer County. And I love to garden, and I wanted to share with you some of the work that I have been doing in terms of just researching what to do from a shoreline planting perspective and some ideas if this is something that would be of interest for you to get started on. So let's get going. Now, when I think about my lake and then when I go to visit different aquatic water bodies, the first thing that I think is if you own property or if you are visiting, what do you want to do naturally? You want to take a look. You want the view of the lake or the piece of water, right? And that's not unusual. So what we traditionally see along a shoreline is going to be maybe the bottom picture on this particular screen, which is a shoreline that has a lot of grass leading right up to it. Or in some cases, we may have a situation where the owner is looking to control some erosion that may be occurring. And the way in which that might be happening is going to be either through cement or wood or some sort of stone treatment. And while all of these do allow us to have that ability to really see that beautiful body of water, I'm going to just challenge you to think, what about if we had an alternative where we could not only get that great view that we want, but we also can improve the health of that body of water? Have a view that can bring us not only the beauty of the water, but also potentially have some beautiful vegetation that we also get to look out over. And the answer is yes, we can do all of these things. So today we're going to explore the why would we do this, how, when, and where. In creating what we are going to be focusing on is the planting the riparian buffer zone. I'll talk about all of them, but that's the one which we're going to be focused mostly on, and that is the space between your shoreline and your buildings. So let's start with being on the same page with what are buffer zones, and is there more than one when it comes to the lake and the shoreline and beyond? And the answer is yes, there are. There's typically 4 that are referred to. And the first one is called the lake zone or the littoral zone. I think about it this way. When the ice is gone from the lake and I go down to the lake and I take off my shoe and I tip my toe in the water, that to me is a littoral zone. It is where the water is going to meet the shore. In a very natural setting, the littoral zone of our lake or our shoreline would likely have some plant life. It could be water lilies, it could be rush, it could be all sorts of different water plants that could be there. And quite frankly, they are absolutely critical to aquatic life. Imagine what we have in that area. We have fish eggs being laid, little fish that are coming to emerge. We have frogs, we have salamanders, sometimes we have mussels, all sorts of things that are growing in that particular part of the lake that play an important part of that ecosystem. So ideally, instead of removing a lot of that natural shoreline plants, we should be considering leaving, not necessarily all of it, but maybe more than we are today. So that's the first area. The second zone is called the shoreline zone or the emergent zone. And this is the area where the water and the shoreline begin to transition. And what is different here is if you are living on lakefront property or have a summer home, for example, your shorelines, everyone's shoreline can look very different. In some cases, it's very flat. In other cases, we may have a very steep slope or sometimes more gradual. And the challenge that oftentimes happens in this zone is this is where we begin to see erosion, particularly if we have a water body that has a lot of waves in it. And that could be just from a climate perspective, or it could be perhaps we have boats that are creating waves on it. And so we have in many cases a need to protect that shoreline zone, create a buffer there. And we'll talk about how can we use plants to potentially do that as well. The area that I'm going to spend most of my time on is what we call the buffer or riparian zone. And this is really from where that shoreline zone ends or the bank of it to the upland zone. The upland zone is really where your home or your property structures would be. And every piece of property is different, but typically a buffer zone ideally is going to be somewhere between 25 and 50 feet that we would be considering doing some planting. So with that information in the back of our mind, let's talk a little bit about why we should consider a plant buffer zone.
Hey, Lorraine,
Yeah.
is your show? I can see your picture, but I can also see all the thumbnails on the side. So I don't know if you're in show mode or not.
Hang on, let me see.
It looks fine, but I don't know if it really is.
Well, I've got this closed caption thing on top of where I would normally be. Here, let me see.
Yeah.
Let me see. Play. Okay.
There you go.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So when I think about a plant buffer zone, what got me really thinking about this is, you know, we keep hearing all of this information of what's happening climate-wise. And if you belong to a lake association, it's probably not unusual for people to be having conversations about the health of the lake on a pretty frequent basis. So the purpose of a buffer zone, a plant buffer zone, is to slow down runoff. And the runoff that we're looking to slow down is going to be water that could be coming from our property that could contain sediments. We're looking to reduce erosion, but we're really looking for that water, that runoff to slowly seep into the ground before it reaches the lake. That's really what we're looking to accomplish. And by doing so, that can aid in reducing that erosion that we talked about on the slope. It can do a great job of trapping sediments. We're going to talk about what those sediments are in a moment. It can control the slope stabilization. So if you have a slope that tends to be a little steeper, what can we do to really kind of stabilize that? And in some cases, it could mean that you have less lawn to mow. And I know David likes to hear that. So when we think about the plant buffer zone, many recreational and residential lakes really today are experiencing a number of water problems. And most of those water problems that we're experiencing are what we call phosphorus pollution. Now, phosphorus pollution enters the lake from the land. And when we think about a plant buffer zone, we are looking for a way to reduce the amount of those nutrients entering the lake itself. Nutrients, when they enter a lake naturally, can create excessive aquatic plant life, algae blooms, sediment buildup. In some cases, it can affect the oxygen level of a bank of the body of water, because what's happening is we have that much more decomposition of plant life in the lake or water body itself, which can sometimes even result in things like fish kill. So a plant buffer zone is going to absorb nutrients that are going to come from common places like sewer leakage or discharge, road salt. You know, we live in the Northeast, and even though we may have had a pretty mild winter, I know the sand trucks were out quite often. And what happens is when it rains or when that snow starts to melt, where is it all going? Well, it's moving down on our property into the lake. Also, nutrients can be chemicals and fertilizers. So chemicals can be human chemicals that may appear in our sewage discharge, such as medications or shampoos and those types of things. Or it can be chemicals that are things that we're putting on our plants or on our trees for different problems we may be having. And of course, fertilizer can be not only from our plants, but from our lawn. Now, we also want to think about some of the benefits of a plant buffer zone from the desirable aspect in terms of species. So imagine that you're sitting down by your lake, maybe you're on your dock or you're sitting under a tree, and you're just in awe because a blue heron lands and catches a fish on your shoreline. Or perhaps you're looking out over your native buffer garden and you see in your swamp milkweed monarch butterflies that are appearing, or perhaps it's bees that are just buzzing around, pollinating. So there's a lot of desirable aspects that if we love nature, which we probably all do if we're on this call, we can begin to increase that or enhance it. Now, one of my personal goals in building a buffer zone is the photo that has an X through it. Now, if you can look very closely, you're going to see that that's a Canada goose. And I don't know about you, but I hear from many lake property owners that this is becoming a problem. In fact, in New York State, we have an overabundance of Canada geese. And, you know, I've done some further research on this, and Canada geese, one couple can actually result in 50 babies over their lifetime. And Canada geese tend to come back to the same space or same place that they started. So it doesn't take long before we have an overabundance of Canada geese. So how can a buffer zone help to maybe reduce the amount of them that want to come onto your lovely lawn, which is what they absolutely are interested in? Well, the answer is if a Canada goose cannot see what is on the other side, they are very, very reluctant to step over that barrier. So when we think about plants, we're going to be talking about grasses and all sorts of things that can potentially create that barrier that would then make them uncomfortable to come onto your lawn. So we can definitely reduce some of that if that is a challenge for you as well. So what I want to do is spend a few moments thinking about what do we need to consider when we're or what do we need to consider not only with a plant buffer zone, but what would it look like? So I have some different photos here. We'll start with the upper left-hand corner. This is obviously a plant buffer zone that has been very well designed. It is one that clearly is very purposeful. If we look at it, and I can't tell the exact plants that are here, but I can tell that we probably have some grasses. We definitely have some shrubs. We have, it looks like some false sunflower that may be along the back, and obviously some other flowering plants and a small tree. So this is one that someone has done some landscape design around, and that would obviously require some maintenance. The same is also true if we look to the landscape design to the right of that. It's different in that it's not as diverse in terms of its dimensions, and it looks like it has probably more natural wildflowers in it. That could have been from seed or could very well have been purposely planted as well. But it is definitely a more of a landscape space. If we look at the bottom left corner, you're going to see what is a very natural plant barrier buffer zone. In this case, this is a piece of land along a shore that has trees that have obviously been there for some period of time. And what's happened is underneath these trees, the decision has been made to allow the native grasses and plants to grow in this space. So this is a great example of very low maintenance. In fact, half of my property is a wooded property, and it is all similar to what you're seeing here, although I have more evergreens on my property. So it doesn't require any work on my part, but it does allow for a tremendous buffer zone for absorbing those sediments and water coming into the lake body. Now, if we look to the photo to the right of that, we're going to see another design, which is very natural in that and the difference between that one and the one on the left really is the one on the right is going to be more of a slope landscape. But on this one, we can see we have some irises in here. We have some grasses that are planted in here. It looks like we've got some black-eyed Susans that may be in here. So it's very natural. And the thing that I really want to point out here is you'll notice that there's a path that's running through this. And when you think about creating a buffer zone, one of the things you want to consider is when you look at your paths that are going to lead to your body of water, create them so that they have a little bit of curve to them. They're not a straight line down, because if we have a straight line path down to our water, we have just created a natural way for additional water to not be absorbed, for it to just make its way down to that body of water. And then the one that I have here on the right, the last one, this is again a natural, it's not natural in that it is planned, but it looks to me like it is one that is on a slope, and it is primarily, I would bet, a garden that has been seeded with different coneflowers and different things that, again, is more of a low maintenance sort of garden. So when I think about where do you get started, the first thing to be thinking about is how do you use your space, right? In some cases, you may say, hey, you know what? I have a certain space down by the water that is for my boat. I have a separate area that is for swimming. We need to consider those. We also need to consider, are there sections of your property that you're looking to kind of have off limits, if you will, where people are not going to be walking for some reason? Do you have a desire for privacy? Do you wish to shield a certain section from maybe a road, or maybe even from a neighboring lot, or perhaps even from recreationists on the water itself? So be thinking about what is it that you're looking to really accomplish or envision. And also from an aesthetic standpoint, do you like to garden? If you like to garden, that could impact the type of garden that you're going to put in. And are you looking to improve the aesthetics of your property through planting? So my suggestion is spend some time looking out at your view today and think about How do you use this space? And begin to jot down some of the things that you're observing from that perspective. And that is going to begin to help you to plan where and how you're going to go about creating this buffer garden. So let's talk about some design tips. I don't know about you, I love to garden. And one of my big challenges is, and I really work to curb this time of year in particular, I get very excited. And what do I want to do? I want to go to the garden landscape shops. And everything looks beautiful to me. And if I don't have a plan, before you know it, I've got a carload of plants and I bring them home and I have no idea really where they're going to fit in. I don't know if they're the right plant for my property. And I end up pretty disappointed at the end of the day because I've spent a significant amount of money and I don't necessarily have what I wanted in terms of a landscape or a garden design. So hopefully we can curb that urge to just get out there and do that and do some planning before we buy or dig. And some of the things you need to be thinking about is when you look at that space, what is the climate? Is it a sunny space? Is it part shade? What's the soil like? And that's a big one because most of us probably don't spend enough time figuring out what the soil is. And we're going to be planting some plants that are going to require the right match for sure. And I'll explain that in a moment. But I don't know if you're aware, but Cooperative Extension does soil tests. You just need to bring soil samples in. Rensselaer County does that as well as the others. So I would encourage you to do that as one of your first planning steps so you know what you're working with. And also, what is the climate? And when it comes to shoreline, we have to be thinking about wind. We have to be thinking about, is it a sheltered area? What sort of climate are these plants going to run into? And be thinking about all of the seasons as well. In my case, I have a certain area that is very boggy. So that is going to require a very different kind of plant environment than other sections of my shoreline. Maintenance. This is a big one because the last thing you want to do is put something in and then dread having to go out there and make it look nice all the time. So what is the right amount of maintenance for you? Are you more the natural, I want it to do most of it on its own, or are you someone that really enjoys digging in the dirt and doing the maintenance that might be required for a more landscape design? Selecting plants to match the location. This is one of the things that was probably number one that I learned in becoming a master gardener. And that is, if we do pick the right plants to match the location, not only will they thrive, but they will look absolutely beautiful and you will not be spending money in areas that you do not need to. So that is why that soil test and all of the things we're talking about become very important. And even more so when we're thinking about planting a buffer zone, we're really not looking to put fertilizer on it. So we want to make sure that we're matching that plant to a soil that it can live with. Now, it doesn't mean we can't amend the soil, but amending is really going to be pretty minimal. It's probably going to be putting some mulch around it and probably adding some aged compost, if you will, to the soil itself. We also want to think about creating a multi-dimensional garden where we have different plant heights, colors, and bloom times. Now, if you look at the diagram that's on this page, I don't know, I'm not an artist and I love this because it inspires me, but whenever I put something on paper, it does not look like that. What it looks like is really a bunch of circles. I might have little lines that tell me where my little paths are going to go. And quite frankly, that's all you need. The main thing is you do want to lay down your ideas on paper. It doesn't have to be to scale, but if you lay things down and you think about where your plants are going to go, it's going to help you to realize not only where you may want it, but also how many of these plants you may need when you go to the nursery. And then finally, I would also suggest that you establish a budget and stick to it. Here's the other thing that I have learned. I've been working on my buffer zone garden for 3 years. And so my message to you is you don't have to do it all at once. In fact, what I did was I walked around my yard and I said, what have I got that are native plants that will work in this zone? And it turns out I had a number of those. I have some grasses, I have some flowering perennials. So we'll talk about what some of those are. And I just started in one area, and I'm just over time, I'm building this buffer zone. And that way it's not a huge project. For some of you, you may want it to be a huge project at once and have it over with. For me, I want to build it sort of naturally as I go along. So what are some of these beautiful plants that we can put in a buffer zone? And again, it's going to depend on your climate and your soil and all of the things we just spoke of, but I'm going to hopefully entice you with some beauty that you can add to it pretty naturally. When we think about a buffer zone, we want to be thinking about some sort of ground cover. So an example of that might be the native foam flower based on your area. Absolutely gorgeous. What I love about that particular plant is it does spread over time. And I'm always looking for, if I've got a larger area, something ground cover wise that's going to make its way beyond one small section. Most of us probably have the iris in our gardens already somewhere. And gardens, or the iris is just a great, blue flag iris is just a great plant for a buffer garden, both the emergent, the second zone, as well as the riparian zone. Swamp milkweed, tremendous plant for us to be putting in a buffer zone. Blue mist flower. One of my favorite things to consider are ferns. I love ferns, particularly ostrich ferns, because they get nice and tall. They spread beautifully. You can move them around. They add a great dimension to our gardens. And I didn't plant these, but down at my lakeshore, I have beautiful cinnamon ferns, and they keep expanding as well. So there are other types of ferns that you can consider, but I would definitely include them in your plants. Black-eyed Susans, they're everywhere. Let's add those because they're going to add that color. Great pollinators. I don't know if any of you have cardinal flowers in your gardens today. This is one of my favorite discoveries over the last couple of years. Cardinal flowers are great for attracting hummingbirds and bees, but they also love a more moist environment. So they would be really good for your emergent and your riparian zone. Columbine, you know what? This is one of the best plants out there because we can take those seeds at the end of the season and just spread them on out, and they add beautiful color to your buffer garden. Trillium's another potential ground cover. It's not going to expand tremendously, but can add a lot of interest to your garden. Penstemon is another example. There are many, and I do have a reference page towards the end of this that will share with you some links of where you can get additional information. And one of those sources I will share now is Rensselaer County Cooperative Extension, as well as the other extensions, will have great resources for native plants for you to consider. This is my favorite, native grasses. The reason why I love these is, remember, I have my Canada Goose challenges. So I am looking to put in some native grasses that are going to create that sort of natural privacy barrier in some ways, but also create a situation where it won't be as delightful for my geese to come up on the lawn. So we have many different choices. If it's going to be littoral, it could be things like our rushes. If you have more of a flatter area that tends to be a little wetter, this would be more in your emergent zone. You can consider different types of sedges. One of those is the tussock sedge meadow. This is a great example of an area that is going to be doing a lot of work to absorb sediments along the way. And then Indian grass is just one other example. I love the colors. I love grasses because they can add a whole nother dimension to our winter time as we're looking down at our shoreline. Now, to add some multi-dimension to our buffer zone, we want to be thinking about native shrubs. There's plenty of them. What I love about native shrubs is not only do they provide a source of food for many of the birds and animals in our area, but they also are oftentimes plants that we can really control the size of through some effective pruning. Some of them by nature are smaller. I have the high bush blueberry that is growing naturally along a part of my shoreline. Now, I love plethora because it, again, you can manage the size of it. It has such a beautiful smell to it. So if you're sitting down near the lake, that could be another positive attribute to it. Winterberry is going to give you some of your beautiful fall and winter light or color. American cranberry bush is a great choice. Viburnum I didn't put on here. We could consider rhododendrons. There's many, many different options for us to add that multidimensional element to our buffer zone. And in some cases, you may have property that would allow you, or where you may want to incorporate into your buffer zone, trees. And some of the trees that I would suggest to you would be things like serviceberry, river birch. In this case, I have a beautiful hydrangea in front of this, and that is another plant that you could consider a bush. And of course, they come in many different sizes, so you have some choices there as well. We have pussy willow, which you may want to consider, witch hazel. There are many different trees that can create a buffer zone that don't necessarily have to become very large trees in the process. So those are some thoughts for you when it comes to what type of planting you can do. And again, I'll stress that maybe you are looking at your property and you're saying, I want really low maintenance. So your garden may consist of ferns, and it may consist of different grasses. And maybe you have some colorful bush or bushes that are in there, very low maintenance. Maybe you say, hey, you know what? I already have a lot of property that I've never looked at as a buffer zone before. I'm going to leave that as it is. So it really is thinking about how much work and what do you want it to look like in the end. And again, I really suggest starting small or doing a little bit at a time. And we all know as gardeners, our work is never really done. We're always putzing around, moving things around, because that happens to be a lot of what we enjoy doing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about things to avoid. This is just a small list, but I think it is one that contains some important things for us to make sure we don't put in our garden, or if we have these already on our property, we may want to consider finding a way to eliminate them, which in most cases is going to be as simple as digging them up. So one of those is the multiflora rose. I know I have a challenge with them throughout my yard. Another is going to be what we see a lot along the roadsides these days, which is the Japanese knotweed. It is very invasive, and it can spread quite easily through birds and all sorts of areas, wind, and something we need to really be watching out for. And while the blue flag iris is one that is native, the one we don't want is going to be the yellow irises. And you do see them in the littoral or emergent areas of shorelines today. And those are very invasive and can crowd out our more native plants. And then another one I'll suggest to you to be on the lookout for is purple loosestrife. I know I have one very stubborn purple loosestrife along my shoreline, and I can't really dig it out, but I certainly get to it every year before it gets to the bloom stage to make sure that it cannot continue to grow. Now, there are so many resources out here for us, and I'm going to suggest that if you are interested in what these are, more specifically, I'm happy to send you a PDF of this presentation. But there are many public resources, many of them I used. There's a lot of information that is New York based on wetlands. And again, I don't know the audience per se. So some of you may be on rivers, some of you may be on large lakes, some of you may be on a pond. So the shoreline, some of these will relate to larger shorelines or may just focus on stabilization. I love, there's tons of resources on native shoreline plants that are both through cooperative extensions and from various county organizations that have a lot of lakeshore property. The one here that you're seeing under shoreline plants, Solitude Lake Management, they are a company, a commercial company, but I will say that I find I get their newsletter every month, and I do find that they do a pretty good job of talking about lake management from a buffer zone standpoint, and also have done a good job of providing a list of different native plants that would work well in our area as well. Also thinking about what do we need to consider. There's a number of handbooks for the Northeast and for our area that I have referenced, and we are consistent enough in many ways with some of the lakes in the Northeast area that what you would find in on these resources is just good information on what to consider in building a buffer zone. And then of course, where do we buy these native plants? There are a number of shops that, or garden stores that in the past were not really focused too much on natives, but I'm seeing a lot more of them in nurseries such as Gades and Fadigan's. Gades is in Slingerlands, Fadigan's is in Latham, Zima's is in Steventown. So there's a much bigger focus and awareness of our everyday garden centers on natives. In addition, we have shops that focus specifically on native plants. And one of those is Dawn's Wild Things, or it's the Wild Rescue Center, actually, is what it's called. And it is in Valley Falls. And I also discovered a number of sites that do not necessarily have a retail shop, but they are small businesses that grow native plants and will sell you those plants through appointment. And one of those is Jess Ecology, and the other is Capital Native Plants. And if you're interested more in invasive plants, there's a couple of references for you on that front as well. So when we think about our gardens, in summary, I wanted to just really kind of get you to think about, consider adding that native plant buffer zone to your shore property. It can be as easy or as hard as you want it to be. The benefits really are very significant to the health of our water bodies and to aquatic life. And many of the challenges that our lakes are seeing today can certainly be positively affected if we, by managing some of the things that we can control. And one of those is what's happening on the land property around that particular lake. A native garden can bring you tremendous beauty, and it could potentially increase the value of your property. You can start small and grow your buffer zone over time. We have a lot of beautiful native plants that we can utilize. In fact, when I went to Dawn's Wild Rescue Center, I found a beautiful, I never knew this existed, a beautiful bee balm that is a native bee balm that I'd never seen before. I put it in my garden, my buffer zone, and it's loving it. So again, you're going to find things when you go out there that you would not normally find in some of our garden centers. And I would also say, let's take advantage of the resources that are out there. Cooperative extension is one of the best resources we have, not only for things like soil testing, but also the information that is available at cooperative extension sites. And also we have help desk services that can assist the gardener with something that is just driving you crazy on your property. And it helps us as master gardeners to become even more expert when we are challenged with some of the things that you are challenged with on an everyday basis. I would also encourage you, if you have specific garden shops that you love to go to that may have native plants, maybe share some of those in the chat with us so that we can let other people know about those as well. And I want to thank you for your time today. Hopefully this has been beneficial to all of you, and I appreciate all of your time.
Thank you, Lorraine. That was great. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed that, and I thought it was a great explanation of the different zones. So that was really super.